I'm originally from Ukraine and I grew up as an immigrant here, so I was definitely raised with this work really hard and you can do anything mentality growing up. And after getting my MBA, I moved into tech and love working in product. But I have a really crazy job and career, and I've always been very ambitious. So I think I always wanted to become a CEO or do something really big with my career, but also always knew I wanted to be a mom. And so when I started trying to have a baby, we actually had some fertility challenges, and it was the first time in my life that I had to really ask myself, is this working at all costs mentality worthwhile, or is there a different approach?
Hello. This is Samantha Saxby with another episode of Moms with Benefits, and I am so excited to have Tamara Hinckley with us. Tamara is a mom of two, first and foremost. She is also a director of product at a leading technology company. She has a Harvard MBA, and she has a newsletter for moms, specifically for moms. And if anybody is connected with Tamara on LinkedIn, she's really a wonderful voice in this space, evolving the conversation on motherhood in the workforce. So, Tamara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's really exciting to be here.
Yeah. So, tell us a little bit more about you. How do you feel being a working mom? How do you feel, being a, director of product, which from what I understand can be a high pressure, stressful job with being a mom of two wonderful girls.
Yeah, I have so many feelings. So a little backstory on me and kind of why I identify the way I do. I'm originally from Ukraine and I grew up as an immigrant here. So I was definitely raised with this work really hard and you can do anything mentality growing up. And after getting my MBA, I moved into tech and love working in product. But I have a really crazy job and career, and I've always been very ambitious. So I think I always wanted to become a CEO or do something really big with my career, but also always knew I wanted to be a mom. And so when I started trying to have a baby, we actually had some fertility challenges, and it was the first time in my life that I had to really ask myself, is this working at all costs mentality worthwhile, or is there a different approach? And so before I even had a baby, when I started trying to become a parent, I really had to think about what does ambition mean? And a big part of my health journey, being diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, was really trying to figure out how I could get more rest and balance in my life. And so it was actually at the time really stressful and scary and isolating, but ultimately a lesson in balance that I think motherhood can teach us in many ways. So I now have two kids. I have a 9-month-old and a 2.5-year-old, two girls. And coming back to work recently, I've been thinking a lot about the experience of moms in the workplace. And as you mentioned, have started writing about my own experience to try to make it less isolating for others. So try to share the ups and downs and a sneak peek behind what it's like to have the crazy life that I do.
You used a phrase, work at all costs. What does that mean to you?
I think that comes back to priorities and values. So I started my career actually on Wall Street. I was working in investment banking right out of college, and it was the opportunity of a lifetime. It was in 2010 when the economy was going through a big downturn, and I was working this high-powered job in finance, making money, and the environment then, and to some extent still, I think, was working 100-hour weeks, often sacrificing sleep, eating well. There was self-care was nowhere near on the radar. And so I think with how I was raised and that first job and working in finance in general, I think I learned the lesson that more hours is the metric for success. And that's how you move up in the world, is more hours is more output is more success. And that's ambition. And so I think that was kind of the mindset I brought when I started in tech. And it served me for a while because I would work on the weekends when maybe people weren't, and it helped me get promoted quicker and get ahead. But I think the at all costs piece for me was when my body started saying, like, this is not working anymore, and there's a sacrifice that you're making with work being your number one priority. And looking back when I was diagnosed, I realized, like, actually I was like not feeling good for many years, and I kind of just brushed it off and didn't realize that there was a problem. And the only way it really was a wake-up call for me was when I was struggling to get pregnant. And what I ended up having to do was totally revamp my whole lifestyle. So diet was a big part of it, going gluten-free, which takes a lot of time and effort to do, reducing all the toxins in my house, but most importantly, from a work perspective, managing stress more effectively and getting more sleep. And so that just meant with the same number of hours in the day, I had to make more space for myself and my rest and my care. And so then I think the shift for me was really like, work can't be my number one priority anymore. And even though I'm still ambitious, how is that going to work? And so that's something I'm still grappling with, because I think the tendency is just put in the work. But the cost piece, especially now as a mom and having a family, it's not my number one priority, but I'm still ambitious.
Yeah, that's a really great kind of struggle dilemma that I think a lot of our listeners can relate to. I think, a lot of our community at Moms with Benefits are very career driven. They want to climb up that ladder. They've always, seen themselves as the CEO, as a director, as the C-suite. And so what is that cost? How do you figure out what that is worth? And then, yeah, it's super interesting. So thank you for sharing kind of your honest journey into that evolution of what that phrase means to you. So talk to me. You've had two girls. That means you've had 2 maternity leaves and 2 return to work experiences. So talk me through, what did those 2 experiences look like for you?
Yeah, I was just reflecting as my baby's turning 9 months old, this whole like 9 months in, 9 months out thing. I realized for the last 3 years, I have either been trying to get pregnant, postpartum, or trying to get pregnant and postpartum. So I'm like, literally have been baby making mode or baby having mode for 3 years, which is kind of crazy. And we were pretty intentional, my partner and I, about having our kids close together. So like to some degree, this is my own doing, but it's made it for kind of a wild experience with the second that I'll talk about. So yeah, with the first, as I mentioned, had some challenges getting pregnant. And then when I got pregnant, both pregnancies for me were like pretty difficult. And I think everyone has a different experience, and difficult can mean different things. So for me, what that looked like was I was really grateful to be pregnant because it took us so long. But physically, it was really hard. And so I was really nauseous, really tired, kind of like the typical first trimester experience. But the kind of unique experience I had was just as I got pregnant, I also started interviewing for my first manager role. And for me, that had been a goal I'd been working towards for years, where I was like, I just really want to make it to manager before I become a mom. This idea of the broken rung that I think I've written about is that many women drop out of management right as they're on the cusp of that big career ladder, because they end up having kids and sometimes make the decision because that's what they want to do, but often feel like they can't do both and leave. And that's part of why there aren't as many women in the pipeline to be leaders at the C-suite. So something I was really conscious about, and I was ready to interview for this job, but didn't really have the time to prepare because I was nauseous and trying to rest. And it was really a struggle of like, do I even go for it? Like a lot of imposter syndrome came up for me. I also felt really guilty. Like, should I take this job knowing if I get it, I'm going to go out on leave? So I ended up taking the job. And really for me, the decision to interview was like, this is a long career journey and this is what I want. And I would really regret if I don't take the opportunity, and I might not even get it. So let me try. And I got it, which was awesome. And my manager was really supportive after I shared that I was pregnant. So I ended up being a manager for 6 months and then going on leave. And I spent a lot of that time really trying to set up my team for success while I'd be out. So my company has a very generous maternity leave policy. And I think one thing I really am conscious about is that not every woman has the ability to take leave, much less paid. And I'm super privileged. We have maybe one of the more generous policies in the US, which is 6 months of leave. And so I got both with both my kids. And for me, with my first daughter, who was born in December 2021, it was still sort of COVID, so kind of a weird time to become a parent and really isolating. I struggled with the transition. I think had some postpartum depression, but didn't totally realize it. But for me, my biggest struggle with my first was I just really wanted to go back to work. And I felt really guilty because I just wanted to get back to building my career and like you said, climbing the ladder. And I loved becoming a mom, but I did not love doing it as my full-time job. And I realized how hard it was. And so I actually went back to work early after having my first daughter. And the policy is you can take those 6 months at any point in the first year. So I took the 5 months and then used the last month at the very end of the year when kind of holidays were quiet. So I still took the time, I just split it up. And so, yeah, I went back early. It was partially because the time of year when I was coming back was really important for strategy discussions that I wanted to be a part of, and ultimately ended up getting promoted within a year. And I don't think that that month made a difference. I did it because I wanted to go back. Mm-hmm. And that first year was just me figuring out how to do both, becoming a mom and being successful at work. But it was really isolating, and I kind of figured it out as I went. And I think the thing that helped with the first was just finding moms who had done it before, who I could talk to about thinking about when to have a second baby, talking to my manager about how to have boundaries, and a lot of the struggles that I think a lot of women face when they're in this new environment, same job maybe, but very different in the way that we show up. So that was, I would say, a big transition, but actually I would say my second baby and transition was in some ways harder, which was really unexpected. So because I had struggles with the first, we decided to start trying for the second pretty quickly, and we wanted them to be close in age. So about a year after my first daughter was born, we started trying for the second, and I the second time got pregnant really fast, which was surprising and unexpected, and really grateful for it. But it meant that like I'd only been back for 6 months, and then I was already pregnant again, and the second pregnancy for me was even harder physically. So I had nausea and exhaustion the whole 9 months. So I do feel like being pregnant for that time made it hard to keep kind of gunning it at work and trying to keep moving forward. And I, again, had to go back to the values of my health was really important. Having done it before, I knew that, rest is important, especially with a baby on the way and a toddler at home. So the second journey, I think, was about really doubling down on health as a priority. And with the second after she was born, the thing that was different was I had real postpartum depression, to the extent that like I knew and I could feel it and I could kind of recognize it. And I think for me, that one was less about, the first was like, I want to go back to work, I miss my job. The second was just a feeling of overwhelm, especially because our second daughter was not as easy of a sleeper at first. Like having two crying, screaming children just would really trigger me. And so I think postpartum depression is really common. The reason I talk about it is because I think the statistics I hear are not as wide-reaching as I think it really happens. I think much more people experience it than the numbers say. And so I think the more people speak up, the more we feel that it's normalized and know how to get help. So for me, what helped was sleep. That was the number one thing, working with my partner and getting more help to get some rest so I could really show up as my best self. And then the thing that I did with my second was I actually had some time off. So people sometimes will say, oh, enjoy your time off when you're going on maternity leave. And that is a huge pet peeve of mine because, as all moms know, taking care of a child is not time off. It is a job that is maybe harder than a real job. And so I was, again, very privileged and lucky to do this, but what helped me was getting a real break and to like really reset my mental health and energy. So we started childcare for our daughter before I went back, and I had some time to decompress, sleep, do some writing. That's actually how I started writing more on LinkedIn. I took a writing course. It helped me get my head back in the game going back to work so I could come in and feel like I could perform at my best. So that's kind of a rough comparison of the two. Happy to go into more details.
No, that was so helpful, and I resonate with after baby number one, just wanting to kind of jump back into work. I'm curious if you have reflected on why that would be the case. I feel like I hear a lot of theories out there that work is what you know, right? And so you feel successful at it, and you have this new baby that you don't know, and you don't know what you're doing, and so your default, your kind of survival mode goes to like, let me just be successful at something. Like I'm still here and I'm still, keeping this thing alive, but like I'm feeling good when I actually know what I'm doing. So does that resonate with you at all, or have you had any other reflections on that?
That's definitely a big part of it. I think it's familiar. There's a feedback loop that you're doing something right. You can see the results, and you know there's value. The way society values work is unfortunately being paid to do something, and so I think even having something to talk about with friends, like I felt like when I would finish my day when I was on leave, I didn't have any time to do anything. I didn't get anything done yet. I was busy the whole day. And when I would talk to friends, I wouldn't really have anything to show for it besides the nap schedule and how naps were going for the baby. So I think just like from a being interesting perspective, work felt like something that was more natural. I think the other thing is I just prefer the intellectual stimulation of my job more so than the intellectual stimulation required to care for a child 24/7. Now, I think in an ideal world, I'd be spending more time with my kids and less time at work. I think 40 hours is maybe not my optimal split, but that's the society that we live in and the way jobs are structured. But I wouldn't, if I had the financial freedom to do it, I would, I like my job and I like being a leader and a manager and learning and growing and challenging in that way. And so if today the mix is 80% work, 20% time with our families or outside of work, I don't think that's optimal for me, but I don't think I would do it the other way around. I really like, I think, the impact and helping people at scale. And I think for me, the other thing is why I felt this urge to go back. There's a sense of control with your job. I mean, you to some extent can control your schedule. You can take breaks. There's like more structure to it, even as a leader with a very demanding schedule and emergencies all the time. Like, I think my job is very chaotic, but I still can control a lot of it. And I think with a baby, especially in the early first year, there's just so much that is out of your control that for me can be really frustrating. Like, they're sleeping really well, and then all of a sudden they stop, and you're like, okay, is it teething? Is it an illness? Is it something else? A regression? Like, you just never really know. You can't like math your way out of it. And for me, given like my data-driven background, at least at work, I can say like, well, let's look at the numbers, and that's the reason. And you can make a decision that has a hypothesis and then really test it. So that element control, I think that's part of what I missed was being able to control my time and the inputs that I was giving and the outputs that I was getting back.
Yeah, that's great insight. And so, one more question I want to touch on as a follow up before we jump into the more of the return to work advice that you have. So, you mentioned the postpartum depression. Thank you for being vulnerable with that in this forum. I agree. I think we do need to talk about it more. I agree. I think the numbers are low. For the percentage of moms that they say experience that. When you said you could sense it, you used the word overwhelmed. I've interviewed another guest who said that if you're feeling off for more than 2 weeks, then that is a sign that there's something else wrong. How else would you describe how you felt at that time and how you were diagnosed, if it's fair to ask?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately because if we think about the term postpartum depression, postpartum technically, I think, is 6 weeks after your baby, but realistically, it's more like the first year. And I felt postpartum depression way past the 6 week point. It was more like 8 to 10 weeks. So when I went to my checkup, my 6 week appointment, I did the questionnaire. I wasn't feeling off. I was feeling okay. And so I passed with flying colors. And then I went home, and then things got harder, and then it started to I felt off. So I think there's like a timing component of when we're screened and how we're screened that should be revisited. How I felt, I think for me it was just like unexplained crying at things that were really small. So to me, like the big trigger was my older daughter had a lot of separation anxiety when her sister joined us, and this like feeling of giving up mom was really hard for her, and I missed her too. And so I think she would scream because she wanted me, the baby would scream because she needed me because I was nursing, and my partner was trying to help, but like they both just needed me, and I needed me too. I needed a break for myself. So that was, I think, the big trigger of overwhelm, was just like I could never get a break, because with the first it was kind of like hot potato with the baby. I take the baby, I feed her, then my husband would take her, and I would rest or sleep or do whatever I needed to. And then with two, it was like, you take a baby, you get a baby. There was like, without, we don't have family that lives nearby. We had some help, but most of the time it was just us. And I think that was when it felt hard, that there was no time for myself. I couldn't get a break. And both kids needed me, and I felt like I had to give them that, and I could never really just take a step back. I think how I ended up getting diagnosed was I saw a therapist for a long time and continued working with her, and I was telling her that I felt a lot of guilt. I felt so much guilt that I wasn't doing a good enough job for either of my daughters, and I just felt like I was never doing enough. And she actually shared that guilt is a sign of postpartum depression, and that was, if I did pick one word that I walked around all day carrying, it was really like that feeling of guilt, not doing enough, not being good enough. So that was how I was diagnosed, was working with her. But I could feel it, and even after like the worst of it passed, it was when I was sleep deprived or overwhelmed, and I would just have this feeling of like, I just feel so like despair and just tears. Like it just felt like, it was like, this isn't me. Most people who know me know I'm like a very happy, optimistic, positive person, and I meditate. Like I can generally keep cool under pressure, and this was like the smallest thing would set me off. And for me, it was more like sadness and despair, less like anger. I think a lot of people experience different, more like anxiety too, and that's also very common. But for me, it was just like sadness that I can't do anything and I'm not good enough. And what helped was working with my therapist, but also just for me, sleep was like the number one unlock. As soon as I started getting more sleep and alternating with my husband for nights and getting some help there, it helped kind of fill my bucket. And I think that helped the emotions be a little bit more in control and think more rationally, that like, we can fix this, we can get out of this, rather than kind of feeling like helpless and alone.
Yeah, I got chills a little bit when you said, my daughter needs me, my other daughter needs me, and I need me. And that is true. Like we need, ourselves to, be healthy, happy, emotionally stable moms. So, well, thank you for sharing very much. So, okay, so you have done a lot of thinking, a lot of reflecting on your two return to work experiences. As you stated, you started this newsletter for moms. You're very active on LinkedIn, sharing your experience. And so you've come up with kind of a return to work playbook full of tips and tricks. And so I want to kind of give you the floor here. Like, what's your return to work playbook for all those listening right now?
Yeah, I'm excited to share this. So there's really a mindset, and then there's kind of three strategies. And so I'll start with the mindset, and then we can diagnose each strategy. I think the biggest mindset is to treat your return like a new job. So I went back to the same company with the same manager with the exact same position both times. And sometimes that is not the case. So sometimes people switch roles, sometimes roles change without their knowing, or they, may get laid off and have to start a new job. But I think in any scenario, especially the first time when you're becoming a mom, you are different. And so the job is actually going to be different for you. And so treating this just like you would start treating a new job, where you prepare beforehand, you're thoughtful about the reentry, you have a re-onboarding plan, and you're much more intentional about it. I think that is the unlock that helped me, and I talk a lot about as advice for new parents. So that's kind of the overall mindset, is just like you would with a new job, you want to prepare beforehand and be thoughtful. So the preparation beforehand, I think when I was going back, but also when I'm starting a new job, I think a lot about like, why am I doing this and what are my goals? And so that I think applies both to my career goals, but also my mom goals. So defining my values is something I've come back to help me anchor those goals. And that's an exercise I think is important to do and can help alleviate mom guilt. So thinking about questions like, well, what kind of mom do I want to be? What is my anchor for how I show up? To me, the word I come back to is present. That's one of my values. And so when I think about the limited time I have with my kids, the limited time I have to be effective at work, I go back to, am I being present? I've heard other people say, words like available or responsive or flexible, like the word might be different, but thinking about the value and how you show up, I think will help alleviate the guilt where if you're conflicted between something that requires work or family time, the decision might be hard, but when you pick one, to me, like if I'm giving myself fully to that thing, then I feel less stress and guilt. So coming back to the values is part one, because then it'll help you understand like, okay, I also value my ambition. I think ambition is a value for me. And so that means I do need to give a lot of myself to my job. I want to teach my kids about ambition and be a role model to them. And so when I'm working, I don't feel guilty that I have a day job, and I don't feel guilty that they're with someone else who's a very trusted and reliable childcare provider, because ambition is important to me. And so I think rooting yourself in like, why are you going back to work? To me, it's because of those things. I value ambition. I want to be a role model. I want to make an impact. And how you want to show up. Again, for me, that's more presence. That can help kind of set you up on the right foot. And especially, I think, defining, when we talk a lot about new parents, the word that I hear a lot about is boundaries. I think boundaries come from knowing what your values are. So I'll give you an example. Last night, I was having dinner with my family and putting our kids down, and I was getting a bunch of questions from my manager about something urgent at work. And so to me, this is a clear example of, well, if you go back to boundaries, you just say, black and white, like I'm not available for work because I'm with my kids. And like generally that is my principle. But sometimes boundaries means, hey, like I need a minute to do this thing because it's important, because that is also a value of mine. And then saying to work, okay, but now I need an hour for my family and I'll be back later. So like I think it's less black and white and more gray about availability based on what you really value at a bigger picture. And so I try not to be on my phone when I'm with my kids, and I try not to be checking Nanit when I'm working or listening for my kids when I'm doing work stuff. So trying to like be really fully in one thing or the other, but also being clear with both parties of what I need to be doing. So telling my daughter, mommy needs 5 minutes to go do this, and then I'll be back and we can play. And telling my manager, I got to put my kids down, I'll be back in an hour. So boundaries, I think, are like the way you take the values and what you care about and live them, even if it might be kind of a back and forth iterative process. And it's on you as the person who has those values to protect them, because otherwise both people or both things will want that of you. So you have to decide and know where your line is drawn and how you will adjust it.
Yeah, I was going to say that feels like it takes a lot of discipline to establish your values. That takes a lot of thought, reflection, time, I think. And so you get your values, then you're like, okay, I'm going to use the boundaries to enforce those values. But that takes discipline. Like I could see myself just being like, oh, it's just a quickie, and and you quickly kind of go down the rabbit hole, and then you feel overwhelmed and burnout and misaligned, and then you're like, how did I get here? And then it's like, oh, I wasn't disciplined about my boundaries that adhere to my values. So yeah, I really like that framework a lot.
Yeah, I think it's discipline and also being intentional. So pausing when something comes up and figuring out like, which value am I going to lean on right now, and how do I want to show up? So that might mean, if my child really needs me, my baby's really sick, then pausing and saying like, actually this work thing is not important right now. Like it's an emergency, but I really need to care for my child right now. And just like pausing and deciding rather than, as you kind of alluded to, like making it a default action. And then vice versa with work. Like last night it was, this is actually really important and my family can wait for 5 minutes and I got to do this because it's going to help unblock the team. And that's okay. Like I don't feel bad about doing that because I'm being intentional about it rather than doing something out of habit and then second guessing myself.
Yeah, I love that. Intentional. That's a much better word. Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Okay. What else
So
do you have to
yes,
share with us?
so step one is the preparation beforehand and reflecting on goals and values. I think part two is really the first day back. I think the first day back can be really anxiety inducing and scary because it's, firsts are hard, transitions are hard for everyone, especially for toddlers, as I've learned. But when you start a new job, there's a lot of pressure, especially coming back from leave, I think, to prove yourself and to show like you're still valuable and can contribute. So I think the game plan for day one is something I want to diagnose next. I think with day one, the mindset I recommend having is recommit with enthusiasm. And here's what I mean by that. It's okay to feel overwhelmed about trying to do this old job as your new you. It's also okay to miss your baby. Like I don't feel guilty that I'm working, but I still miss my kids sometimes and wish I had more time with them. And it's also okay to feel imposter syndrome and doubt yourself and whether you are able and capable to do this job with less time. So I think all of those and more experiences and feelings are all very valid and real. We all show up with multiple emotions. And I think the mindset for day one is you say, I'm excited to be back, even if you don't mean it, because it sets the tone for how you come back, both for yourself and for your team. So for yourself, it's kind of like you have to be your own cheerleader and fake it till you make it of, I am still the high achiever I used to be, and this is going to be a hard transition, but I have a positive attitude and mindset and I will get through it. It's like reminding yourself that you can do it, even if part of you is saying or doubting whether you can. But I think it sets the tone for your team because I think the motherhood penalty is real. Women make less money than men after having kids, and unconscious bias is real. And people view parents differently after they have kids, especially moms. I felt, especially after having my first baby, that I kind of had a target on my back for when I'd have my second because I was pretty vocal that I wanted multiple kids. And so I think some people were just like, when is Tamara going to get pregnant again? So I think there's this like perception that I wanted to personally manage. And so I'm excited to be back. And I actually set up meetings with my manager and my skip level and a bunch of senior people. And I out loud said, I am still the ambitious Tamara that you know and love, and I have big goals and I want to take on big projects. And even just saying it out loud, they were kind of like, yeah, Tamara, we know you don't have to tell us. But I do think it makes a difference because I think if you don't say it, people might make assumptions like, oh, well, this person is going through a big transition. We don't want to put too much on their plate and might be coming from a good place, but it might mean missing out on opportunities that you actually want. And so I think stating this up front, setting the right tone in those early days and weeks is really important to get you off on the right foot. So that's a big part is this like recommit with enthusiasm, both for yourself and how you show up.
Yeah, almost like it's taking control of the narrative of your return.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I
that's
love that.
right.
Love it.
Yeah. So I think that's day one. That's my number one tip is just, even if it's hard, show up with a smile and, power pose, do whatever you need to do to show up well. And then the third piece I think is more beyond the first day, but the first week or month back is really crafting your own onboarding plan or re-onboarding plan. Unfortunately, most companies and managers don't treat a return to work like a new job for their employees because they're busy and overwhelmed. And I'm a manager and I've had people coming back on my team and I haven't always done this until I went through it myself. So I think if you're not given a re-onboarding plan, you should create one. And here's what that looks like. So number one is aligning with your manager on your goals and priorities. So if you're hired into a new job, you often get a job description that says, these are the outcomes you need to drive. Here's what success looks like. So getting clarity and asking questions from your manager on what are your top focus areas, what does success look like, kind of connecting the dots from previous conversations around development areas. I think it's important to have that reset conversation, just like you would if you're starting a new job and want to make sure you're on the same page. So that's part one. Part two is doing a listening tour. And this may not apply in every job or every situation, but I think it does apply for many people, especially in tech and in my experience in product. And so a listening tour is basically a very intentional way to get back up to speed on anything that you may have missed out. So regardless of how long you are gone, weeks or months or years, you're going to have to get caught up on the things that happened while you were out. And that is probably going to feel really overwhelming. Your inbox is flooded. And so listening tours is a set of the priorities you have for your manager and then the set of people that you want to meet with in a very particular order to get up to speed. And then at the end, have a proposal for what that means and how it impacts what you want to do. So basically, it's making a list. I recommend starting with 10 people, starting with the people you work closely with, or people that you've worked with in the past who you know and trust and could kind of help you get up to speed on, the real talk of like what's been happening that might not be written down, and then kind of working your way out to more senior stakeholders, that maybe new people that joined while you were out. And then often, if you start with those 10, they will give you one or two people each to go meet with as, oh, you should talk to this person about this project. And so the list will grow. And so I like to constrain this to about a month. This is a playbook for the first 90 days. The book, The First 90 Days, has this playbook, and I've just adapted how it might work in this context. So part one is this listening tour and asking the same questions of the people that you meet with, usually around what's going well, what can be improved, and where do you think I can add the most value? And this will give you something to talk about before you actually have an opinion on what you should be doing. You'll learn about like a pulse check on the environment you're getting back into, and then you can calibrate the priorities that you aligned with your manager on with the reality on the ground and where there might be disconnects or new things that you've learned. So after the listening tour, call it 3 to 4 weeks of meeting with people, reading a bunch of information, joining meetings, kind of fly on the wall, absorb. Then is when I recommend shifting more into action mode and writing down what you learned in, I call it like a state of the world presentation or document. So basically, it helped me do this, and I did this very intentionally with both leaves, just writing down everything I learned and summarizing it and sharing that back with the manager and the people that I met with on like, here's my game plan. So that, to your point earlier, sets the tone that Tamara is in charge and she is here to be a leader. Like regardless of what position you're in, it helps you kind of start to have some momentum and show quick wins and identify quick wins for your team that you might want to take on or changes you want to make. And it gives you something to do in the beginning when you're kind of like, well, what am I doing? So at least during the listening tour, you can say, I'm doing a listening tour, I'm reading, I'm going to share back everything I learned, and then we'll regroup. So it kind of creates space in the beginning to take your time and ramp up slowly and gradually without having pressure to produce information, but also shows confidence that you're being strategic and thoughtful about how you get back up to speed. And then after you have the document or presentation that you share with people, then that kind of transitions you more back to doing your job and kind of the rhythms that you might be in. So I think that the first day is critical in how you show up and having the right tone. The first month is critical for showing the pace at which you're getting up to speed and how you're going about it thoughtfully and not just kind of jumping back in without any intention.
That makes a ton of sense, and I think that's a wonderful strategy that you've laid out. Where do you think new moms may get quickly overwhelmed? Like, I have a feeling lots of these meetings on the listening tour would come out with lots of action items that then a month out, or a month in rather, you have now 30 things on your list, and then you're almost at the overwhelmed state. And so it's almost like, okay, does that circle back to, values, boundaries, discipline, intention? So are we back full circle to the beginning here?
Yes, I think that's right. I think it goes back to your values, but also people often say that parents are really good at prioritizing because they're so stretched for time. And so I think it goes back to your systems for prioritization. And I think that includes your systems at work, but also your systems at home. So something we haven't talked about yet that I think is a big part of success for me and what I share with new moms is based on the book Fair Play by Eve Rodsky. It's this idea of you're familiar, awesome. It's this idea of like your system for getting your life stuff done so it doesn't clutter your mind when you're at work. And if you happen to be in a partnership where this happens naturally, that's amazing. Most people I talk to say that the common experience is that mom has some leave, often, not always. Dad may not have any leave, and so mom kind of stumbles into being the expert on the baby. And then when they go back to work, they're still by default doing all the things because they know how to clean the bottle, feed the baby, put them down. And so there's this like imbalance that happens by accident where mom just is doing a lot of the kid stuff. And that definitely happened with me actually both times, even though I'd done it before. And we were very intentional about addressing it. So my partner and I did like a very thorough audit of all the work that has to happen to run our household. We categorized everything, we put it in a spreadsheet, and we had a chat about how we split things up. For us, our value was about equal partnership and aiming for like a 50-50 split. That's not always the goal. You can have a different split or think about it differently, but that was something we really valued as a couple. And we redistributed things to make them more even or fair. And then I set up systems for the things that I owned to automate as much as possible, get rid of stuff or outsource. And just having all of that kind of clear and always re-optimizing my systems, I think is a big part of how I can show up at work and not be stressed out, because then I can leave work when I'm not at work, but I can also leave home when I'm not there and have more bandwidth and space to really not get overwhelmed. So to your point, to your original question, if I have all my life things in order, then I think it's about prioritizing the things at work and having the right conversations with my manager, aligning on what is important and what can really wait. But I think where moms often make the mistake is they jump into trying to prove value really quickly at work because they're eager and they want to, show that they can produce output without being intentional about like, is this actually important, and aligning on the order in which things should get done. Or they neglect the work at home that is piling up, and that is actually the source of stress that then shows up as like someone who's frazzled and feels out of control and isn't their best self at work. So I think having both sets of prioritization systems can help reduce the overwhelm. And by the way, this is an ongoing process. So I think step one is doing it after first child or second child, or just in general if you've never done it before. But I think about this system on an ongoing basis. So my husband and I meet every week and have like a family meeting of prioritizing stuff that has to happen and who owns it. That's like a tuning mechanism for the prioritization system. I do the same thing with all the things that are on my plate at work, where every week I review them with my manager. So it's like always revisiting because priorities will change, and trying to figure out how I can show up present to what I'm doing and not worry about the other things because I have systems to do them in other ways.
That was really, really insightful and really, really well said. If anybody hasn't checked out Fair Play, can't recommend it enough. Tamara's done a great job at explaining the benefits of it and the systems that can be created. And so thank you for going into that, because I think that is definitely what I hear. It has a huge impact on moms that are trying to figure out this whole family and career thing. So thank you for sharing. Is there anything else you want to share about return to work?
Yes, the last thing I want to share is something that I've been thinking a lot about, which is like, how will having more kids impact my career? So I think a big question women face if they want to have more kids, not everyone does, not everyone can, but for those that are thinking about it, the question is like, what's the right time? How do I think about this in the context of work and managing this? And so I can kind of share how I thought about it, because I wish more people talked about this, and people usually don't share this until they're well beyond having kids, and then it's like a little too late. So I think, step one is like, do you want to have kids? And if so, how many? And that's a conversation to have with your partner or yourself and figuring out for your own situation. And there's no right answer, and it might not be yes. And so if the answer is yes, I think thinking about timing for me, my approach was I really wanted kids who are close in age, but I also, from a career perspective, wanted to kind of smush the amount of time that I was having kids as close together as possible so I could get past that phase and then kind of get to a new phase where I wasn't out for 6 months twice. And so for me, having my kids close together was intentional because I thought it would minimize the impact on my career. That might not be the case for everyone, and every situation has so many nuances and complexities, so I'm not saying this is the right thing for everyone, but I think thinking about it in the situation of thinking about it based on your situation and the timing that you can control can help make this big decision and not have it be something that derails your career or sets you back if you don't want it to. So my husband and I talked a lot about how will having kids impact his career and my career and like the partnership, and then also just there's never a right time, right? But sometimes there are things happening in life that might influence timing. So if you are starting a new job and you already have a kid, maybe it makes sense to wait because you want to set yourself up for success before you bring on something new in your life. If you might struggle and it's going to take a while, like us with fertility issues, maybe it's trying sooner rather than later. And then of course there's like the whole age component. But I do think one thing that I really worry about is this idea that having kids will hold you back in your career. And I think that doesn't have to be true. And you can make decisions to some degree that can minimize the impact. The playbook is one way to like set yourself up for success when you go back to work. But I think this broader career family planning conversation, there are ways to be intentional about it that can minimize the impact. And once you've had a kid, you're already a mom. So like for better or worse, like the motherhood penalties coming your way or not. So to me, my own perspective was I just want to get that over with and kind of move on to having life where I'm not having children all the time. But I think some people worry about it, and my advice is like approach this with, again, your values, what you really care about, and your systems, and there's no wrong time to do it for your career, but also there's no right time either. So yeah, hope that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. It is something that comes up a lot. We have folks in the Moms with Benefits community that are planning to wait to make sure that they're eligible for any type of paid leave or leave in general that they get. So that's just one example that pops up time and time again. So if there is any element that you could plan, it's worth thought, certainly. And again, there's no wrong decision, I don't think. So thank you for touching on that, Tamara. All right, well, thank you so much. You shared so much wonderful insight. I appreciate, all of your experience that you've gone through and your vulnerability with your 2 leaves, and honestly the return to work playbook, all the tips and tricks. It's more than tips and tricks. It feels like a true structure that listeners in our community can follow. So thank you so much for sharing. If listeners do want to reach out to you for any reason or find your newsletter, where can they do so?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I love when people reach out and ask me questions because it inspires what I write about and how I share ideas. So definitely reach out on LinkedIn. And there you can also find my newsletter, which is on Substack, and it's called Half Moon Hustle. I love when people read and subscribe, but also ask me questions there too. I love talking to moms who are going through this experience or thinking about it or past it and have reflections. This is one of my passions, so would love to hear from folks.
Awesome. Thank you again.